So if you're out sketching in nature or you're drawing from a reference image, it's always really useful to look at what are the lightest parts of the image and what are the darkest parts of the image. Now, it kind of goes without saying that with most of our art, the lightest parts are going to be the paper, the lightest values we can get, or by adding in whites in or whatever. Now, the darkest parts that we're going to get of our art are going to be by using dark colours like blacks and things like that. But most of the time, the reality is, out there in nature, in the real world, there is very few true blacks and there is very few true whites. Let me show you some examples. So if we look at this really simple image here of this coot or moorhen, it's a dark bird, but there's not going to be any like true blacks on it, or if there is, they're going to be in the line work or underneath. Because as soon as you block in a black, like a black, all of a sudden it goes dead. It loses any kind of sense of form or shape or texture. So you have to be careful, don't go too dark. I have shown you on previous videos where you can actually use value scales when doing monochrome paintings, and those can really help you learn about contrast and value studies. So I really suggest you check that out. This was one that I did for water soluble ink, which basically means most ink. And here is another example of that, where I'm just using one ink and it's a dark blue ink and it's been diluted for the sky. This is a very impressionistic kind of messy picture, but I had a lot of fun doing it. I love this. So I'll show you another example that I think worked quite well. And here is just a little ruined building near where I live, near a reservoir. And you can see the values are, there's a nice sense of what darks are without being too darks. Within darks, you can still see some textures of bricks, things like that. And there's still some variation within those dark areas. So you still have that sort of rich feeling of colour and texture. So finally, I mean, I could go on forever with this and I don't want to bore you, but here's an example of where it doesn't work. But what you can see here is what I've used to fill in the areas of shadow within the building is just black. And I think it kind of kills the image, really. It becomes a kind of black hole that sucks you towards it. You know, it becomes the primary focus of the image. A lot of beginners with watercolour, perhaps the biggest mistake they make is they don't use enough contrast. They don't get confident enough to really make the image pop. I like contrasty images anyway. I always have done with my art. I've always enjoyed big bold marks, and I like it to be a bit daft. I don't like it to be too controlled. But yeah, so my advice is always make it more contrasty than you think, and then you'll learn your level. Because if you never go anywhere near your level, if you never know what your limits are, you'll never know what you're capable of. There you go. Terrible cliche. So let's do an example. Let's go through and do an example, and I can talk about contrast, and I can talk about the values here with this fantastic little drawing of this truck. So if you enjoy my videos and you fancy watching them without adverts, and also if you want to get a little bit more sort of one-to-one tuition from me, then consider joining my Patreon. For a few bucks a month, you can get access to all that and much more exclusive content. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I want to thank you too. That's wonderful. And if you've got any tips about contrast in your art, let me know in the comments, or just drop a comment to say hi. All that interaction really helps the video. I appreciate it, and it costs you now. So here I'm sketching with a 0.1 fine liner. This is a black uni pin. Now, they're scratchy, particularly on like textured paper. This is cold pressed paper, and this is a very small drawing. This is only a 6x4, so it's really a tiny little drawing. I actually quite enjoy using very, very thin fine liners like this on very small bits of paper, because I think it gives you a kind of almost like a pencil-like quality. I'm not going to draw the whole landscape. I'm going to really truncate the detail. I want to get those headlights in. That's a big part of the character of a vehicle, really. And I want to be showing some of the detail in the foreground. So I've got a slightly thicker pen here. I think this is a 0.8. It's a lot thicker. And I'm going and I'm putting in some big chunky lines here. So I want the sketch to be a bit loose. I want to get a few extra lines. I want a few extra dots. I don't want it to be a clinical sketch. I want it to have some life to it. So that's it for the line work. It's a pretty simple one. As I say, it's a tiny little drawing. So here I'm using deep light watercolours, and I'm going in with a base layer of raw Sienna. Now this is a perfect, I mean, if you look at that reference image, you can see why it's a perfect base layer. You know, I'm adding in a bit of yellow, a little bit of the blue, which is, I think, a primary blue there. What I'm trying to do with this base layer is create some tones, some variation in tones. So one thing you can see straight away is a lot of those colours, which seem quite strong, now it's dried, they've become a lot softer. So that's why I often say try and be a bit bold with your watercolours, because obviously once they're dry they will chill out a bit. So that's a really good layer, that's a really good base layer to continue the painting on. So what I've decided to do here is to go in with some quite heavy shadows. So I've mixed up some French Ultramarine and some of the raw Sienna, and that's going to give me a nice sympathetic kind of shadow colour. Now I'm going to go and drop that in now, because this is only going to be a 1 or 2 or 3 stage process. I don't want to be messing about with you know, putting too much detail in. I've dotted a little bit of blue there into the headlights, and I think that's quite nice because it feels like a bit of a reflection of the sky. Now before that dries out too much, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to add in a little bit of that green foliage. Now again, this is slightly impressionistic. I'm using the chrome green here from Deep Light, and maybe adding in a little bit more shadow. And then what I've done is I've dried that again. So now this is dry, I can go in and put a little bit more detail on. Now this is supposed to be the kind of the bits of paint that are left. So a little bit more, I would say, accurate sort of patina on the vehicle, if that makes sense. And there could be rust spots, there could be little bits of paint. I'm not trying to replicate exactly what's in the reference drawing by any means. This is my own interpretation of the scene. And sometimes I quite like that. I quite like it being a little bit going astray from the reference drawing. So that's going to get hair dried again. I spend most of my time hair drying when I do these quick sketches. So that's on a hair drying. This is a really tiny piece. This is 6x4, and what I've done is I've just shown you some super close-ups here. As you can see, when you get close up, it really is quite chaotic. I love it. I actually really, weirdly, always prefer these drawings really close up. I think, you know, doing a really, really small drawing, really bold, and then blowing it up into a big size, you get these wonderful irregularities in line width, and yeah, it really has a lot of life, I think. I like it. So there you go. That's great, isn't it? Pleased with that. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you can see from, and I hope you can see how the layers were built up to get to the point where I think the values and things were sort of roughly right, but then there was some decisions made about, you know, where to put the shadow, where to put in those darker values that will lift the whole picture and give it real life. Sometimes people do comment about my art, and they say that sometimes when I put a shadow value in, they think it's too much, but then when they see it, you know, 5 minutes later, it actually looks okay. And that's because as paint dries, it loses a lot of its intensity. So it's going to fade a little bit. So if you put in some shadows that look about right when they're wet, the chances are they're not going to be enough pigment. Now that's fine, because you can go in glazing another layer and another layer and build up your shadows gradually. And I would encourage you actually to do that, because I think it's a sort of safer way of working. But as you get more and more confident, what you realise is you can actually put it in and realise that actually that's maybe a bit too dark, so it's probably about right. Or if it really, really is too dark, get some tissue and just lift it straight out. So I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed drawing it. I love anything, particularly old vehicles that are sort of abandoned and rusty. I always wonder what backstory they have and what tales those things could tell, but maybe it's just the silly romantic in me, eh? So we'll see you next time. Keep giving yourself the space and time to enjoy art. Have a bit of a check out. Turn your phone off. Find some happy place. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.